The Ascent of Kira Vale. They said it was impossible. She proved them wrong. Don't miss this journey of grit and glory. Kira Vale stood at the base of the Serrathean Cliffs, the wind biting against her cheeks as it howled through the jagged peaks. The sun was just beginning to rise behind her, casting long shadows across the ancient rock. To most, the cliffs were legend, unclimbable, untamed, and unforgiving. No one had ever reached the top and returned to speak of it. The locals called it the Titan's Wall. No one survives that, her brother Bryn had said, hands trembling as he read her plan. Even the best mountaineers turned back. It's suicide. But Kira wasn't just another climber. She was born in the shadow of these cliffs, raised on stories of failure, of men and women lost to the heights. Her own mother had disappeared on the northern face 20 years ago. The villagers called it a tragedy. Kira called it unfinished business. She ran her fingers over the etched names on the stone memorial near the trailhead. 37 names, all etched deep. All climbers who had vanished trying to conquer the Titan's Wall. And then, she looked at her own name, already half-etched by the village stonemason in grim anticipation. "You're wasting your time, Vale," said Captain Drenner of the Climbing Guild, arms crossed. "You're strong, sure. Determined, obviously. But this wall isn't just about grit. It's a grave." Kira just looked at him, then turned toward the path without a word. She didn't need approval. She needed altitude. Her first day was treacherous. The low levels of the climb were filled with unstable rocks and shifting ice shelves. Every move demanded precision. She used specialized gear she had built herself: titanium graphene composite anchors, heated gloves with embedded sensors, and boots with microspikes that could retract based on the surface. Her late father had been an engineer, and Kira had inherited both his mind and his toolbox. But beyond the gadgets, it was her mind that carried her forward. She studied weather patterns obsessively, trained under hypoxia conditions, and practiced mindfulness until her focus was razor-sharp. That night, as she bivouacked on a narrow ledge, she looked out over the valley far below. Her camplight flickered in the thin air. It was bitterly cold, and the silence was suffocating. But her resolve was like fire in her chest. She took out a small photograph from her inside pocket. Her mother, wearing the same blue scarf Kira now wrapped around her own neck. "I'll finish it, Mom," she whispered. Day 2 brought the real test. The Spire Traverse. A narrow section where the wall jutted out horizontally over a 2,000-foot drop. No footholds, minimal anchors. She had to swing, grapple, and rely entirely on upper body strength. One misstep, one missed grip, and she'd be airborne. Most climbers turned back here. She didn't. With each swing, the strain on her arms grew. Sweat froze on her forehead. Her fingers screamed in protest. But she kept moving, like a dancer across the sky. By the end of the traverse, her muscles were trembling, but she had made it. She collapsed against the rock, breath heaving, a smile on her lips. It was only then she noticed the carved initials in the stone, MV. Her mother. This was as far as she had made it. Kira's heart thundered. "She was here," she whispered. "She was here." Tears froze on her cheeks. By the 5th day, Kira was 3/4 up the Titan's Wall. The air was thin, her oxygen supply dangerously low, and her hands had begun to numb permanently. But she pushed on. Her radio crackled. "Kira, come in," Bryn's voice said. She hesitated, then answered. "I'm still climbing. Turn back. You've proved your point. You've made it farther than anyone. Please." "No," she said, her voice dry and ragged. "Not until I reach the summit." "But what if?" She turned the radio off. This wasn't about proving something to the world anymore. This was about finishing what began 2 decades ago. The 6th day began with a blizzard. Kira had anchored herself into a narrow crevice overnight, barely wide enough to fit her body. When the snow began to fall, she welcomed it, until it became a whiteout. Visibility dropped 2 inches. Her gear was buried. Her water bottles froze solid. Even her reinforced tent was torn in the wind like paper. Hours passed. She waited, shivering, thinking. For a moment, doubt crept in, like ice in the veins. What if they were right? What if this is too much? Then she remembered her mother's last journal entry, found years ago in a leather pouch at the village archives. The mountain punishes those who fear it, but it also listens to those who respect it. Kira took a slow breath. She would not curse the mountain. She would earn it. When the storm calmed, She emerged from her crevice like a phoenix from ash. The world around her was a white, shattered silence. No birds, no wind, just her and the wall. She pressed on. By day 7, the slope became vertical ice. The climb turned from dangerous to deadly. Her ice axes struck the glacier face like chimes against crystal. One wrong move would send her plummeting into the abyss. Her breath turned to fog that froze before it faded. The climb was no longer a physical trial. It was mental, spiritual, elemental. Halfway up the ice face, her left cramp slipped. The axe in her right hand held fast, but her body slammed into the wall with bone-rattling force. Pain tore through her ribs. She cried out, but there was no echo. Blood bloomed under her coat. She hung there for a minute, maybe longer. Every breath now hurt. No one would blame you for turning back, whispered the mountain, or maybe her mind. But then she looked up. Only a few hundred feet remained. The summit was close. She wrapped her ribs, adjusted her harness, and climbed. Each inch was war. Each breath, a razor. The last push took hours, maybe days. She lost track of time, of pain, of hunger. Her fingers blistered and bled. Her knees buckled. Her skin blistered from windburn. But her eyes never strayed from the summit above. She reached the final ledge as night fell. Above her, a flat plateau dusted in snow, where the wind no longer screamed, and the stars were close enough to touch. She hauled herself up with a cry that was part agony, part triumph. And then, she was standing. On top, Kira Vale, the first human being to stand atop the Titan's wall. The world below stretched endlessly, a sea of clouds and craggy peaks, forests like green dust, rivers like silver threads. The sun peeked over the horizon, lighting the world in gold. And there, resting in a small hollow behind a rock outcrop, she saw it. A faded scarf, blue as twilight. Her mother's. Kira collapsed beside it. She didn't cry. There were no tears left in her. But she smiled. She had made it. Not just for herself. Not just for her mother. But for every person who had ever been told they couldn't. She took the scarf and wrapped it around her arm. From her pack, she pulled out a small titanium rod and drove it into the ice. Attached was a flag, not of a country, but a crest she designed herself. A pair of wings rising from a mountain. Not a flag of conquest, but of completion. As she stood there, wind roaring, sun rising, the weight of the climb lifting, the world below unaware that the impossible had just been done, she felt more alive than ever. The impossible wasn't a wall. It was a door, and she had just walked through it. 1 year later, at the Grand Assembly of Climbers in Calden Reach, a new memorial was unveiled. Not a list of the fallen, but a tribute to the one who reached the summit. Kira Vale, first to conquer the Titan's wall, in honor of her grit, her glory, and the light she left for others to follow. Children pressed their hands to the stone. Young climbers studied the path she took, and the skeptics, once so loud, had fallen quiet. And yet, Kira Vale didn't care much for the noise. She stood at the edge of a new cliff now, less high, but no less challenging. A new peak to climb, a new story to write, because she had learned one thing the world had forgotten. Impossible is just a dare. Kira Vale didn't return to the village right away. After the climb, she spent weeks alone in the northern reaches, letting her body heal and her spirit settle. Her ribs mended slowly. Her hands were scarred permanently. But something inside her had changed, hardened, yet softened in the right places. She had touched the summit. But more importantly, she had touched her past. The scarf she had retrieved from the Titan's wall now hung in her tent, a silent banner of closure and love. She knew now, her mother hadn't failed. She had come heartbreakingly close. The world had simply never heard her story, so Kira would tell it. By spring, word of her feat had spread far beyond her quiet valley. Articles, documentaries, even offers from climbing gear companies came pouring in. She declined most of them. Instead, she founded Project Summit, an initiative to train young climbers, especially girls, from underserved regions. She poured her energy into building a training compound near the base of the Titan's wall, transforming the land where doubt once lived into a cradle of belief. And the people came. From the deserts of Ellerin, the swamps of Taith, and the icy coasts of Morrowind, they came. Not just to climb, but to learn, to try, to grow. Many failed their first climbs. None were shamed, because Kira had changed the narrative. One day, as she walked the training compound, she spotted a girl maybe 12 years old, halfway up the beginner's rock face. She was trembling, arms shaking. "I can't," the girl yelled. "I'm going to fall." Kira called up gently. "You might. But what if you don't?" The girl paused. Then she reached upward and didn't fall. That moment stuck with Kira more than any applause or award. 2 years after her climb, Kira returned to the village square. This time, she wasn't alone. Dozens of young climbers stood beside her as the village unveiled a new monument beside the old memorial wall. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a sculpture. Kira standing atop the Titan's wall, arm raised, scarf in the wind. Below her, the words that had defined her story. They said it was impossible. She proved them wrong. But Kira added a second plaque beneath it. "So can you." The monument became more than a tribute. It became a pilgrimage site, a symbol for artists, athletes, and dreamers of every kind. For anyone who had ever been told no, it whispered back, "Maybe." Even Captain Drenner of the Climbing Guild, once her fiercest critic, stood beside her at the unveiling, eyes misty. "You made me eat my words," he said, shaking her hand. "I didn't climb for you," she replied, but smiled. He laughed. "I know, but I'm glad you did." Despite her newfound fame, Kira never stopped climbing. She explored new ranges, quietly, humbly, always seeking new challenges, new edges to push. And she never forgot the lesson of the mountain. That pain can forge power. That grief can be a compass. That the summit, though glorious, is never the end. 10 years later, Kira stood at a different summit now, older, steadier. Beside her stood her own daughter, Ava, eyes wide, heart wild. "That's the Titan's wall?" Ava asked, pointing at the shadowy peak in the distance. Kira nodded. "It is. You really climbed that?" "I did." "Why?" Kira didn't answer right away. She looked out over the valley, the sky painting the horizon in strokes of fire and dusk. "I climbed it," she said slowly, "because they said I couldn't. Because I had to know who I was beyond the fear. Because someone had to go first." Ava's eyes were bright. "Can I climb it one day?" Kira knelt, brushing a wind-tangled strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You can climb anything," she said, "especially what they say is impossible." They stood there, 2 generations of grit and glory, watching the sun dip behind the mountain that had once seemed eternal, unyielding. But even mountains can be moved, one step at a time.